Ch5 Productions presents the final chapter of Unforgiven, Part 1. I'm gonna let you guys know, this will be a multi-part final chapter. It's gonna be a long one. I appreciate those of you who have strapped in for the ride with me. I hope you enjoy the first part of Chapter 5. In this first part of the final chapter of Unforgiven, I will reveal to you David's revelation to Jake about how vampires in this series truly function, their hierarchies, and what could have been his fate. A fate worse than death. You will bear witness to how David moves into adulthood, and finally, his meeting with the redhead, and whom will become such an integral part of his life. The sound of crackling bacon and the scent of eggs being poached fills the air. The hands that hold the utensils required to cook this tasty meal begin to tremble. Their strength begins to fade. A long, nailed set of hands gently place themselves over the hands which do the cooking. Her soft Gaelic lilt hits David's ears. As his hands become steadier now, she asks him softly, as she assists him, hands capable of rending concrete, as tender as a newborn with the one she loves so dearly. Her question is simple. Why are you so stubborn, you daft idiot? He responds softly with his deep tone, a smile on his features, because he always said he couldn't stand a weak man. It's obvious that he's messing with the taller redhead, who stands behind his strong-shouldered form. She snorts in amusement and thwacks him gently before setting her chin on the top of his head. He swats her gently in response on the thigh, as he, with her help, finishes the breakfast. He playfully offers the vampire some. She does take a raw piece of bacon and pops it in her mouth with a smirk. There is silence as he sits down and eats his meal. He takes his time, hands shaking from fatigue. Even with the reworking of his energies and the blood-manipulative powers that Myridan possesses, the injuries he had received when Jake shot him came very close to sending him to the grave. Her hand grabs his, thumb gently running along the side of it as she asks him pointedly, "Are you sure you desire to do all of this on your own?" It is evident the woman is terribly concerned for his well-being, and they both know she can be clingy if not careful. This is something she has worked on all of her centuries of existence. David senses her concern and touches his forehead to her own. He speaks gently. "Hey, if I thought you were being too much of a mother hen, I would say as such." She nods gratefully and exhales softly. "I do not want to hear of him hurting you. I made it to where he is almost as a puppet, with the strings cut. But maybe you can get closure for both of us." The man nods slowly. "Of course. We're mentally linked. You'll be able to hear and see him as well as I can." Myridan exhales lightly, not needing to, but still feeling the all-too-human urge to worry as she looks away. Her green eyes flicker red for a moment, for it had been that connection which had saved her lover from Jake to begin with. Myridan Triculos nods slowly, forcing her anxiety and concern back. The fact is, David is right. She needs to place her own worry and desire for control on the back burner. This is the one thing she had always loved about Petros and David. The absolute lack of fear, but deep respect for who and what she is in the long run. Jake Brogan slowly begins to awaken. He finds he is sitting in a fairly comfortable office chair, and not in the rickety one that he had been placed in previously. He also finds he can actually move his unbroken hand with little effort. To his frustration, he still is unable to move or stand on his own. The blasted pike still sticks from his shoulder. He notices that he is not facing the beautiful redhead who had literally crippled and unmanned him. No, he is facing the object of his hatred, the one who he made a scapegoat for so long. He faces David Malcolm, formerly David Schweitzer, The fellow does not gloat over him. Jacob would rather see that than what he sees in the boy's eyes. That look of sadness and regret. Jacob, to his own credit, does not become hostile. He simply speaks. Bitch said, "It be you I got answers from. I'm not gonna lie, kid. I could stand, right now, damn sure try to finish what I started." His tone is filled with rage and hatred, but also honesty and a grudging respect. The young man notes that most of his hatred is directed at himself, and this saddens him further. He learned a long time ago not to hate the enemy, but to also not show them mercy. He can't afford to. The fact that they are enemies saddens him. He of all people knows all too well how smart and determined the man is before him. It's a waste. He responds cordially. "It was at my suggestion. She desired to end your life years ago. But me, in my foolishness, said no. Maybe I sensed something like this. I don't know. It helped in other ways. It helped push me from selfishly keeping secrets from one who has been anything but selfish with me. We all have our flaws, Mr. Brogan. Or would you rather me call you Jake?" The man fights the urge to spit blood in the other man's face. However, he managed to retain his senses, and he speaks in response. "Jake's fine, asshole. Kinda curious. Why can't you remove this damn stick from me?" David responds simply. "To do so would kill you too early. Your body's already giving out. The injury, and her tearing out your scrotum, as it is, had she not intervened telepathically, well, the man doesn't mince words. The shock that would have been registered by your brain would have killed you in moments. She wanted you to feel all of it, but not for you to die from it. I am guessing you want to know what Petros has to do with me, correct?" The man gives the boy a look that says, "Duh, asshole." David laughs softly. "I would say I'm sorry for not having answered your questions back then, like they are being answered now. The fact is, I didn't know what I was dealing with back then, for one. The other is, before the man I called my father, Daniel, took me in, let's leave it at this. I had to do things you wouldn't believe. I promised myself I would not put those I love at risk by mentioning what truly had happened to my original family. It's bad enough I caved in and did answer your questions, but then you began blaming me. My cooperation was done. I'm gonna tell you right now, I dealt with bullies all my life. As far as I was concerned, you're just another one." Jake shakes his head and responds, "I'm not gonna apologize, kid. I think we both know that'd be a fucking lie." David nods in silence, and he simply continues, "Myridan doesn't like unanswered questions. It's an annoying quality both of you have. At times, I have that same itch that needs to be scratched. I desire to make sure you know what you need to before it's done with. I guess I owe you that much." He thinks to himself, "Damn straight you do, boy." But he keeps silent before asking, "Got anything to drink?" He nods and places a can of Coke in his hand. To his credit, he does nothing foolish and drinks it gratefully. "Thanks. I do have a couple of questions before you begin your spiel, though." David smirks gently and sits in a chair across from the larger man. His eyes hold amusement, but also a deep regret. He tries to hide this, but him being him fails. It's not possible. He asks softly, "Ask away." Jacob, after a moment, finally says, "I think she mentioned two brothers, right? I know she mentioned one before. Who was the younger one?" He speaks. "It's a very valid question. That bastard is the reason, indirectly, that both of our lives were ruined." He looks away, really not wanting to continue. But in the end, it's needed. So he does just that. His name was Malachi. He was born roughly 3 centuries or 4 after Myridan was. The curse, of course, took effect when he was 18, and he, unlike Nikolai or Myridan, reveled in what he became. He rebelled against the rules, the statutes Brius put in place. He tried to kill them all with an army of revenants. What the hell's that? I'll explain that in time. He rubs his temples and continues. The first thing you must understand, he created his own legion of full-blood vampires. That is the second generation, or line, under the first three, which you already know. They call themselves the Purebloods. These vampires caused an entire plague of problems, not just for us people, but vampires as well. It was only about maybe 4 centuries ago that Brius finally staked him through the heart, subdued him in the Euphrates River. That's why vampires, who were created past the point of that event, cannot cross over running water without the help of a vehicle or some type of assistance. He narrows his eyes. Okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. So whatever trauma the purebloods go through, any full-bloods or lesser created after that point, they suffer the results of that event. The younger man nods respectfully, relieved that the former detective catches on so quickly. Exactly. Seeing Petrus crucified and then dying like he did traumatized a certain redhead we both know. The aversion to the cross, while far from fatal, does cause some discomfort in all later vampires as a result. Jake finishes his can of soda completely and replies, "That's all good and nice, kid. What does it have to do with Petrus and you?" David says, "You are going to have to bear with me, or we can just end it here and you get no answers at all. To be honest, this is tiring me, because of what you did to me after all." Jake snorts. "You are a manipulative little shit. You know that?" The young man shrugs. "I can be. But then I don't make excuses either. Neither of us really have time for it. Do you want me to continue or not?" Jake motions, as if to say, "Get on with it." The other man nods and continues. These traumas, the first 3 go through, affect the lower generations. There are 3. The first 2 you know of. Full-bloods can sire up to 3 children, or bring them across. These are Myrebloods. Myrebloods can bring none across. They are usually brought across as a reward. I use that term very loosely. Many times it is a punishment. They're tricked. He snorts in amusement but listens as David continues. The previous generation has control of their children completely, and the first 3 can control them all at a whim. Of course, such forced control can drain the vampire, taking this action. As each vampire ages, their skin becomes paler, and their skin takes a look of almost a marble hue. The first 3 can harden their skin to that consistency at will, even if the naked eye cannot see it. Jake grimaces, looking to his damaged and useless other hand. "So that's how the bitch broke my fucking hand." "Great." David smirks slightly. "Yep. It's a natural reflex for him. Some full-bloods can do it, just not to the same extent. Hell, some can manipulate shadows, people, animals. The first 3 can do this without any effort at all. Despite the fact they get paler as they age, the first 3 can also spend a few hours in the sun before feeling the effects of it. They don't like doing it because it's painful." Jake wants to give out a smart-ass retort, but he doesn't. He actually listens with rapt attention, fascinated, as David continues. "There are surprisingly some Myrebloods that are able to walk on the sun as easily as when they were mortal. The bastard who killed my dad, Benjamin, was one such vampire. He had a thing for young girls, I guess. I don't know too much other than Malachi. He created that fat bastard Guido. And he sired Benjamin and also the black-haired whore that killed my sister. Jake asked the boy, "Got curious. Why did they choose your family? That's one thing I never did understand." Dave responds, "That's simple. Benjamin, from what that's my pet name for Myridan, theorizes, is he'd been infatuated with Helen for a while," he stammers. "And he planned on doing sick things to her, but, well, Dad kind of interfered. They all decided on a whim to pretty much try and kill everyone but me." Jake looks to the younger man in response. "That's one reason I gunned so hard for you, kid. That right there. Why'd they let you live?" David looks to Jake and answers the fellow. Simple. Killing children's outlawed. You have to understand something. The oldest two of the three pureblood vampires eventually made amends to their father. Nikolai was tired of holding a grudge and learned to control his abilities, and actually made children of his own. In case you haven't figured out, all vampires, with the exception of Brias himself, are sterile. They're undead. Miri waited too long to revive Petrus. That is why he came back as a monster. The result of what he became is known as a revenant. It has no memory of its former self, and only desires blood. The second mistake she made was not to drain him of all of his blood before giving him her own. That creates a successful bond between the two. Not even her father knew how to do this at this time. But also, it was beyond his power to this day. You have to remember, he's living, his children are undead. He looks away finally, and speaks. She hated her father for a very long time. She calls it throwing that failure in her face, as he did. She held a grudge for a very long time, actually. In fact, when she went to Gaul, she settled there, she shunned any help he offered. I know she learned a lot over there. Who taught her? She never told me. I do know she had many lovers, both male and female. She never was really devoted to them like she was with Petrus, though. It's funny. They planned to consummate their marriage the night he was rounded up and crucified. She had been hunting prey when it all went down. She never told her father that, number one, they had married, or the entire detail of what happened. She resented and hated him that much. You know, kid, it's funny. I can relate to that. My old man was a self-righteous fucking prick. He didn't give advice, somebody gave orders. Never explained a goddamn thing. Don't blame her. Not one damn bit. The young man is surprised at the man's statement, but he hides it well. And he continues. Well, mistakes were made regardless. That's true. She, like her siblings, learned to create their own soldiers and companions. There is a catch, and it must be a willing transference of blood. Or else, well, you get a revenant. You already know that problem that causes, so moving on, he says. I do not know how old that fat vampire, Guido, was, but he was made right before Brias staked Malachi. The only way to kill a vampire is sunlight and decapitation. The stake just paralyzes them. It halts their regeneration. Starvation, of course, as well as fire, will kill them also. In short, each vampire is a different being. All are capable of lengthening their fingers to claws. Their fangs you've seen, and some can harden their skin, and of course, move faster than one can see. Some can even use magic, beyond what they could in their human lives, due to them being immortal, of course, and having the time to focus their craft. There have been experiments on revenants to make super soldiers, but they all have failed. So what about ghouls and all that shit? David answered him. That's a good question. They are called the Lost. New lost ones can be made after being freshly killed. They don't last long. Their memories deteriorate as time goes on. They have zero willpower also. They just carry their master's orders. Even Meyer-bloods can make 'em. And the suffering they go through, constantly decaying, etc., it's dreadful. Miri planned that for you. It took a lot of convincing otherwise. The former cop looks to David in a look of disgust and horror. The man had never truly shown his fear, and hid it behind a mask of bravado. Now he shakes his head and says, with a trembling voice, "Something tells me it was more than that." His eyes show fatigue and shock. However, David calmly hands him a glass of water. I can't tell you why. But she is capable of feeling remorse for her actions, just like you and me. She is a killer, Jake. Make no mistake. But the experience she had with her turning her lover into a black-eyed monster had an effect on her. If you think immortality is some grand party, let me tell you right now, it isn't. He clears his throat and says, "I'm going to explain now what happened to me after your stupid ass nearly killed me and got shipped off to prison." The cop smirks and leans back as if to say, "It's about damn time." Despite the trauma of his nearly dying, and of course being forced to relive his torments, the boy named David, adopted under the last name Malcolm, finally comes clean to the ones he calls his mother and father. Surprisingly, Daniel says one thing to him, which shocks him. "I believe you. However, you cannot allow this to slow down your choices in life, alright? You do that, then that asshole who almost killed you, and those monsters that killed your parents and sister," Daniel pauses for effect, "they win." David graduates at the top of his class. However, instead of going to trade school to get his apprenticeship, he does something a wee bit unexpected. Daniel has a close friend named Stephen Heldridge. The fellow is a retired carpenter who runs a small shop out in a small town in Maine. David, desiring to get out of Texas, strikes an agreement with the man. He will let the fellow train him in the ways of becoming a master carpenter, so he will have little trouble getting the paper down the line. In return, he will work for the man and tend to his shop and earn the training, and also earn a decent paycheck. He can leave at any time, as long as he lets the old man know ahead of time. The weather there is cold and unexpected to the young man, but he adjusts well. He proves to surprise even Stephen with his ability to learn and his work ethic. It is something he never expected to see from a kid of this new generation. David rents himself a small apartment and actually makes a few friends of the local townspeople, many his age, which surprises even the boy himself. He manages to begin dating in earnest, and despite his average looks, his natural charm, and overall decent nature definitely make him fairly well liked. Nothing truly works for the kid, though. This is a frustrating thing for him. He feels as if he is half a man, and that in itself begins to have an effect on him. He doesn't slack off of work or training, but he dedicates so much of his own time to it that Stephen one day tells him, "Boy, you were taking 2 weeks off. Don't worry, I'll keep paying you. But if you want to stay with me, kiddo, you're going to have to learn to take care of you also. It's not negotiable." David does take the time off as required. He feels a frustration, and even a slight bitterness, despite the fact that Stephen meant his best interest at heart. You see, David has always felt this hole deep within his being, and keeping distracted and busy, it helped him keep sane. Daniel, the man he loves as his father, had always made sure to keep the boy occupied, for he himself, being a military man, knew all too well of personal demons. In this, he made sure that David was preoccupied with things as he dealt with his own demons. Even though David was silent in much of his suffering, of course, Daniel was far from stupid, and this is why he made sure the boy was kept busy. These next 2 weeks are nothing but pure hell for the young man. His friends are somewhat of a help, of course. Somewhat, anyway. His best friend here in this small Maine town is a fellow named James. It is at this time that the two decide to make a trip to a local nightclub, a fairly expensive one. David, to his chagrin, is of course marked with a ban, revealing to the tender that he is under 21. He doesn't drink much, so that's fine with him. James, on the other hand, is roughly 24, and it is no problem for him to get plenty of booze. The fellow looks to David and smirks. Man, you really need to learn to loosen up, Dave. I mean, come on, look at those two chicks over there. They're fucking really checking you out. He laughs and waves lightly to the girls, who actually smile at the handsome boy, and one even walks over to where he and James sit. However, he feels no connection when he forces himself to talk with the seemingly brainless woman before him. James, of course, is selfless and a serious braggadocio, as he has always been, despite him being overall a very decent guy. Time seems to drone on, especially for David. Eternally. He keeps absently up with the small talk of the twit who blathers on and on and on endlessly. She offers him her number, and he nods, gently taking it. He prays to whatever higher power exists to make this person whose brain is as small as a quail egg go away. It seems as if God or the devil heard his prayer, because it is at that moment that James nudges the boy with his elbow. Hey, take a look at that chick over there, man. David sees the most stunning redhead he has seen in his life. This nightclub, as I said before, is not cheap. The cover is not fun to have to pay. Yet even despite this place being a high-class establishment, the woman seems to exude an ancient power and class that none can truly comprehend. The woman is abnormally tall for any female, at least a good 6'1". That is surprising. The beauty has the loneliest look in her eye that he has ever seen in another human being besides himself. He notices how she's dressed, from the crisp blouse to the dark jeans that seem to embrace her thin but womanly form. The heavy trench coat of pure leather falls to her feet, obviously priceless and extremely expensive. The lining of the coat catches his eye, crimson, and it drives him to distraction, as James says, dude, she's walking our way, man. His voice catches as the woman he was talking to scowls and stands. She walks off, as James says, hey, man, why you leaving? The upturned middle finger is her only response. The brainless idiot who was blathering in David's ear and shrinking his IQ quota bit by bit looks to the redhead, who actually casually pulls an extra seat and smooths her coat over so she can sit comfortably into the chair. The sound of leather scraping and creaking against the chair drives David's heart to hammer as James gulps. The redhead speaks calmly, her Irish accent brooking no argument. Why don't you head somewhere else, girlie? You're not wanted here. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the first part of the final chapter of Unforgiven. I am going to begin working on Chapter 3 of Werewolf Hunter. I already have the main plot written down. Now I have to focus it into a story form. It will be my usual freestyle, unlike this, which was handwritten. You'll be hearing from me quite soon. Be patient and be aware. I truly do what I can to make sure these stories are enjoyable and definitely listenable. You guys be blessed.